Jamaican society and its legacy of colonialism and slavery finds itself in this post-emancipation and post-colonial period, kind of caught between freedom and bondage. In many ways, the project of emancipation is not complete. In the words of Caribbean theologian Cartwright Davis, emancipation still coming. As people, we are free from physical slavery, but we still need to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. Politically, we are an independent nation, but still in many ways are tied to the queen of our former colonizer. We have an autonomous economy and our own currency, but we are badgered by the forces of the world economy, in which we are really just a minor player. We have a rich and unique cultural heritage, but it seems as if we are so susceptible to the trends of and fashions and culture from places like North America. We're free, but we're not really free. And one of the areas of Jamaican society in which this tension between freedom and bondage exists is in the area of family life. The freedom side of it is that despite the attempts during slavery to limit stable family formation among the enslaved population, the Afro-Jamaican family survived. The bondage side of it, however, is that the patterns of family that have evolved through the period of slavery have given rise to family forms that are unstable and which have become weakened institutions of socialization. And this, I believe, has contributed in no small way to some of the problems of social disorder, of gender conflicts, of declining values and attitudes that we see in Jamaican society today. Family life has survived, but not in its healthiest forms. And that is not to say that there aren't healthy families in Jamaica. That is not to say that there aren't families that produce people who are thriving and who are doing well and who are well adjusted. But it is to say that a fairly large percentage of our population grow up in families that have some dysfunctional components. Of course, there's a sense in which every family needs some measure of redemption because families are made up of broken people. But when we look at the landscape of our society, one of the features that come home to us is the unstable realities that people experience in their families, in their households. So what are some of the ways that the legacy of slavery has impacted patterns of family in Jamaica today? Well, to begin with, the forced migration of Africans, mainly from West Africa, to work as slaves on sugar plantations of Jamaica, meant that large numbers of Africans were forcibly separated from their traditional practices of family, and in their new environment, at times were actively discouraged from forming stable families. You know, during this period of enslavement, many plantations actively discouraged the slaves, the enslaved, from forming families. Moreover, our enslaved ancestors could be moved from one plantation to another without any regard for any intimate unions that might have been formed that could have led to family formation. There is, however, some evidence that there were some plantations that might have allowed limited accommodation of families among the enslaved population. That probably, was a way of giving into unions that had formed between persons on a particular slave plantation. It is likely too that families were more encouraged and became more prevalent after the abolition of the slave trade, when the supply of laborers from Africa was cut off. And so planters had to find alternative strategies to replenish their labor force. Nevertheless, for the most part, the enslaved Africans were treated like cattle. And so just like cattle, one of the ways that some of the planters sought to manage the labor force or shortage that happened after the abolition was that certain more robust male slaves became like studs and would impregnate more than one of the female slaves as one strategy for replenishing the labor force. And so it is practices such as these that might have, during this whole period of slavery, that might have contributed to the tendency that still persists today of forming multiple partners. This is prevalent among many Afro-Jamaican men today. These practices may also have given rise to the matrifocal character of so many Jamaican households, where a lot revolves around the mother, the strength and the constancy of the mother's presence. For as you can imagine, in slave society, when children were born, they would have been brought up with the mother. And if the union between the mother and the father was not firmly established or encouraged, then it is more likely than not that those children would have grown up more with the mother than with their father. And so these practices may also have given rise to, as I said, this kind of matrifocal presence where mothers are central and fathers are often absent. What is more, the enslaved Africans were not permitted to formally marry. And so visiting unions, common law unions, became the predominant forms of conjugal unions. And these have persisted down to the present time. Yet another feature of family life that might have been influenced by the hardships of slavery is the harsh parenting practices, with the common use of corporal punishment and verbal abuse. That seems like a natural feature of how parents understand that they need to correct their children. When you add to that also the obvious racism and discrimination that is associated with chattel slavery, as well as the self-hatred triggered by colonialist notions of superiority, all of that might have been at the heart of the harsh parental practices that evolved as ways that our parents, that many of our families understood parenting. It had to be tough on their children. And sometimes that, too often it seems like discipline and correction morphed into physical and verbal abuse. Many of us are still reeling from the stories that we heard, the accounts that we heard of a few days ago, of a child, I think he might have been 7 years old, that was brutally beaten by his stepfather for simply refusing to eat. He wasn't feeling I was, probably seeming to have had some upset stomach, didn't want to eat, and he's refusing to eat, occasioned a persistent battering by his stepfather that ultimately was fatal. What causes a parent, or a step parent in this case, to feel that that is an okay way to reprimand a child? It is features like those that are present in the practice of parenting in many of our families in the Jamaican setting that is of much concern to the health and the sense of freedom and the potential for family life to become a freeing and empowering experience. The unstable patterns of family life in Jamaica that were evident during slavery have remained 200 years later. And they might have been generated by the conditions of slavery and colonialism, but they must have required some other kinds of factors, more contemporary factors, to have been preserved over these 200 years. And I want to suggest that it is partly so because of a combination of factors. Let me highlight 4 possible factors that might have contributed to the persistence of these unstable patterns of family 200 years after slavery. One factor is the declining influence of the church, of course, that as we have progressed in the post-slavery period, and increasingly in the 21st century, the influence of the church is declining. So some of the teaching and concerns and principles of commitment to family and commitment to fidelity in sexual relations and so on, those things are declining. But secondly, the persistence of harsh economic conditions that lead people to sometimes move from one place to another. And so sometimes are unable to take care, to provide the supervision that they desire of their children. The migration waves that have impacted Caribbean society, and no less so Jamaica, have sometimes in detrimental ways impacted the health and stability of family life. And then, of course, there is the changing attitudes globally to sexual relationships, to marriage, and the whole question of the increasing rise of divorce and separation. All of those break down some of the time-held values of marriage and family life. And so the dynamics are changing. Dynamics are changing for as women. The dynamics between gender are changing. And that's changing as women enter more and more into the workforce and as they become more and more educated. And I'm not for 1 minute saying that they shouldn't enter the workforce or that they shouldn't maximize their potential educationally. But the drift without proper compensation or proper compensatory changes has an impact on the stability of family, especially since the families as they have evolved in the Caribbean have been so matrifocal, so much revolving around the constancy and presence of mother. So when mother is on the move and mother is not as settled in one location, then without any kind of compensating changes, then it is likely to impact the stability and health of families. Then, of course, there's a growing acceptance, just acceptance of some of these patterns as normal, you know. And so as those factors have coalesced, the factors during slavery society that have led to some of these unstable patterns of family have persisted. And so the situation of family life in the Caribbean, and certainly as we experience it in Jamaica, continues to be this nexus between freedom and bondage. And the liberation of the family, therefore, a family life from patterns that do not optimize human relationships and do not foster the welfare and upliftment of society, must become a part of our quest for a fuller experience of emancipation as a people. So as we take time out over this week to consider emancipation and to consider how we engage in furthering a fuller liberty and freedom for us as people, I want to suggest that family must become one of those areas of emphasis, that as we free up and emancipate and liberate ourselves from some of the patterns now that undermine our flourishing, that is when I believe we will see some of the changes that will make our people more fully free, more fully complete in the sense of their sense of identity and their sense of well-being and their sense of security, and the kind of foundation that family needs to provide to allow families, persons to thrive and to be their best selves. We must free ourselves from family slavery by investing more in teaching skills for relationship enrichment and conflict resolution. That must be one of the ways that we position ourselves to have more emancipated families that create more emancipated people. We must free ourselves from family slavery by promoting the benefits of strong marriages, which still remain the most stable form of unions, with all the issues of increased divorce and separation. Marriage relationships continue to be the most potentially stable basis of union around which stable families can be grown. And therefore, more premarital preparation for couples thinking about marriage, and greater support for marriages through enrichment events and support groups for married couples must become a standard part of every congregation's pastoral ministry. We must free ourselves from family slavery by doing more to teach parents alternative forms of discipline and helping them to develop more affirming ways to interact with their children. You don't always have to cuss out your child in order to see the child advance and do better. Learning more affirming ways to express love and support for our children has to become part of what we do with the children, the parents of our children that come to our basic schools, the parents of children that come to our high and prep and primary schools. Those become ready audiences that we must utilize to teach and pass on parenting skills and techniques that allow them to be more effective as parents. We must free ourselves from family slavery by adopting workplace policies that encourage workers to attend school events to support their children without fear of jeopardizing their employment, because this kind of support of our children is part of what helps them to feel that they are worth it, to develop some sense of esteem, and to nurture ambition for the future because they know mom and dad are behind me. We must free ourselves from family slavery by talking more about the benefits of father presence and less about the ills of father absence. Very interesting and positive trends now, I believe, are happening in our nation as more and more fathers own their responsibility. And what we need to do is to encourage that and to lift that up and talk more about that than to continue this narrative about father absence that leaves fathers and men unsure of what to do when they father a child, especially in light of the fact that visiting unions continue to be pretty prevalent. So very often the father has to function as father, not living in the same household with the child. And therefore we need to be spending the time looking at strategies to help fathers consider, how can I be an effective, active father, even though I'm not living with the child? Because some fathers have found a way to do so, and others now can do it also with a little help from us. We must free ourselves from family slavery by making time for family devotions, where God is not just an unseen guest, but the ever-present host of our household. So it's Emancipendence Week. Time to reflect on freedom from slavery and upon the political independence and relative stability that we have enjoyed as a nation. But it's time also to come to terms with ways we are still not free, with ways in which emancipation still coming, with the ways we need to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery, because none but ourselves can free our mind. It's a time of year when we can take stock of our patterns of family and commit ourselves to ways of living that will enrich relationships between spouses and between parents and their children. We need to commit to patterns of family that foster stable unions and stable forms of family that will preserve the welfare and advancement of all our people and play its part in creating a just, equitable, loving, and God-fearing society in which the vulnerable are cared for and all are equal at the foot of the cross. I hope as you contemplate life and situation in Jamaica this Emancipendence weekend, that you will contemplate the changes that you can make in your family and the changes that you can make in your congregation to enrich family life, to enrich the life of couples and married couples, especially in your congregation, and the ways in which you can affirm and strengthen and build the confidence of your children and young people as you interact with them and as you prepare them to play a meaningful role in the future of our nation. So enjoy the Emancipendence weekend, Emancipendence week, and may we experience, as we walk in accordance with God's way and will, experience a fuller freedom in our individual lives and in the lives of our families, and the life of our nation. God bless you.